For 3 days, their dog refused to leave his kennel, ignoring food, growling when they got too close, guarding something with his life. But when they finally looked inside, their hearts shattered. Whatever he had been protecting, it was something they never expected. And when they realized what it meant, they couldn't hold back their tears. What had their loyal companion hidden for so long? And why did he refuse to let them take it away? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the bedroom floor as Alex Smith stirred from his sleep. He blinked slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the warm light filtering through the half-drawn curtains. Beside him, Mia's gentle breathing remained steady, her dark hair spread across the pillow like a fan. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 6:15 a.m., right on schedule for his morning routine. Something felt off, though. Alex sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair, and that's when it hit him. The usual scratch of paws against the hardwood floor was missing. No eager whine from the other side of the door. No familiar thump of a tail waiting to greet him. "That's weird," Alex muttered under his breath, careful not to wake Mia. Ranger was always there, without fail, ready for their morning walk. The German Shepherd's internal clock was even more reliable than Alex's alarm. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood up, stretching his arms above his head. The floorboards creaked softly under his feet as he made his way to the bedroom door. When he opened it, the hallway was empty. No happy dog, no wagging tail, no morning kisses. "Ranger?" Alex called out softly, not wanting to disturb Mia. He padded down the hallway, checking the living room, then the kitchen. The house felt unusually quiet without Ranger's morning enthusiasm. A movement caught his eye through the kitchen window. There, at the far end of the backyard, was Ranger's kennel, a spacious wooden structure they'd built when they first brought him home. Alex squinted, making out Ranger's dark form inside it. Pulling on his shoes, Alex stepped out onto the back porch. The morning air was crisp, and dew sparkled on the grass. "Hey, buddy," he called out, expecting Ranger to come bounding over at the sound of his voice. But the dog didn't move. As Alex approached the kennel, he noticed something wasn't right. Ranger sat rigidly, his ears pinned back against his head. The food bowl near the kennel entrance was still full, kibble untouched from the night before. "What's wrong, boy?" Alex kept his voice gentle, but Ranger's posture only grew more tense. Then came a sound that made Alex stop in his tracks. A low, rumbling growl. In all their years together, he'd never heard Ranger make that sound, at least not directed at him. The screen door squeaked behind him, and Alex turned to see Mia stepping onto the porch, wrapping her robe tightly around herself. "Everything okay?" she called out, concern evident in her voice. "I'm not sure," Alex replied, taking a step back from the kennel. "Something's wrong with Ranger. He won't come out, and he just growled at me." Mia joined him, her bare feet leaving dark prints in the dewy grass. "That doesn't sound like him at all." She studied their dog with worried eyes. "Ranger, sweetie, what's the matter?" When she took a step forward, Ranger's growl deepened, and he lowered his head, his entire body seeming to bristle. The sight of their usually friendly, gentle dog acting this way sent a chill down Alex's spine. "Let me try something," Mia said, retreating to the house. She returned moments later with a handful of Ranger's favorite treats. The sound of the treat bag usually had Ranger running from anywhere in the yard, but this time he remained unmoved. "Here, boy," Mia coaxed, holding out a treat. "It's okay, we just want to help." But Ranger curled himself tighter into the kennel, completely ignoring the offering. His eyes, usually warm and trusting, held something different now, a mixture of warning and protection. Alex ran a hand through his hair, frustration and worry competing in his mind. "I don't like this," he said. "He's never acted this way before." "Maybe we should give him some space," Mia suggested, placing a comforting hand on Alex's arm. "He could be feeling sick." Alex nodded reluctantly. "Yeah, you're right. If he's still like this later, we'll call Dr. Peterson at the clinic." As they turned to head back inside, a sound floated on the morning air, so faint it was barely there. A weak meow came from inside the kennel, but neither Alex nor Mia caught it over the sound of their footsteps on the grass and their own worried conversation. They reached the porch, both casting concerned glances back at their beloved pet. Ranger remained in his kennel, his posture unchanged, standing guard over a secret they had yet to discover. "I'll make some coffee," Mia said, squeezing Alex's hand. "We can check on him again after breakfast." Alex nodded, but his eyes lingered on the kennel. In all their years with Ranger, he'd never seen anything like this. Something was definitely wrong. But what that something was remained a mystery. For now. The next morning dawned cold and gray, with a light drizzle tapping against the windows. Alex and Mia had spent a restless night, both of them waking several times to check on Ranger through their bedroom window. Each time, the motion-activated security light had revealed the same scene. Their dog hadn't moved an inch from his position in the kennel. Now, as Alex stood at the kitchen window nursing his second cup of coffee, his worry had evolved into something heavier. Ranger's food bowl remained untouched, the kibble now soggy from the morning's rain. The German Shepherd's usually gleaming coat looked dull in the weak morning light, and his rigid posture hadn't changed since yesterday. "This isn't like him at all," Mia said, coming up behind Alex and wrapping her arms around his waist. She rested her chin on his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck. "He's never gone this long without eating." Alex set his coffee mug down on the counter with a soft clink. "I know. Something's definitely wrong." He turned to face his wife, noting the dark circles under her eyes that matched his own. "I think we need to check on him properly this time." Mia nodded, her face etched with concern. "Let me grab my raincoat." They stepped out onto the back porch together, the wooden boards slick beneath their feet. The rain had settled into a fine mist, creating a ghostly atmosphere in the early morning light. As they approached the kennel, their footsteps squelching in the wet grass, Ranger's head lifted slightly. Alex knelt down in front of the kennel, ignoring the dampness seeping through his jeans. He studied Ranger carefully, noting how the dog's eyes kept darting to something behind him in the shadows of the kennel. Every few seconds, Ranger's gaze would shift, from Alex to whatever was hidden in the darkness, then back to Alex again. "Do you see that?" Alex whispered to Mia, who had crouched down beside him. "He keeps looking at something inside." Mia's brow furrowed as she watched their dog's behavior. "We need to check what's in there," she said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. "This has gone on long enough." She began to reach forward, but Ranger's reaction was immediate. His body went completely rigid, and a low, warning growl rumbled from deep in his chest. The sound sent a shiver down Alex's spine. It wasn't the friendly dog they knew, but neither was it purely aggressive. There was something else in that sound, something almost desperate. Alex hesitated for a moment, then shifted closer to the kennel entrance. The wooden structure was spacious enough for their large dog, which meant the shadows at the back were deep and hard to penetrate, with just his eyes. As he leaned forward, straining to see into the darkness, a sound reached his ears that made his stomach twist. A meow, so faint it was barely audible over the pattering rain, but unmistakable. The sound was weak, desperate, like a cry for help. Alex's eyes met Mia's, and he saw his own shock reflected in her face. They both leaned forward, peering into the shadows of the kennel. As their eyes adjusted to the darkness, they could finally make out what Ranger had been protecting. Pressed against their dog's thick fur was a tiny kitten. Her small body shook with violent tremors, her fur so matted with dirt and debris that it was impossible to tell its original color. Each breath she took seemed to be a struggle, her sides heaving with the effort. A nasty gash ran along her flank, crusted with dried blood, and her ribs were clearly visible beneath her skin, evidence of days, perhaps weeks, without proper food. "Oh my God," Mia breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled up in her eyes as she took in the pitiful sight. Alex started to move closer, but Ranger's reaction was swift. The German Shepherd shifted his body, placing himself between Alex and the injured kitten. His lips curled slightly, not in aggression, but in what Alex suddenly recognized as fear. Ranger's eyes, usually so warm and trusting, held a plea, as if begging them not to take away the tiny creature he'd been protecting. "Alex," Mia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Her hand found his arm, gripping it tightly. "I think he's protecting her." Alex swallowed hard, the realization hitting him like a physical force. Their gentle, loving dog had transformed into a guardian, keeping vigil over this injured kitten through the night. He hadn't eaten, hadn't moved, hadn't left his post for even a moment, all to ensure this tiny life remained safe. The rain continued to fall around them, creating a soft curtain of mist that seemed to isolate their little group from the rest of the world. In the kennel, Ranger maintained his protective stance, his body curved around the trembling kitten like a shield. The morning light caught the moisture in his fur, making it glisten, while behind him, the kitten's labored breathing created small puffs of vapor in the cool air. The rain had picked up, drumming steadily against the kennel's roof as Mia knelt in the wet grass. Her heart thundered in her chest, matching the rhythm of the falling drops. The sight of the tiny kitten, barely breathing against Ranger's fur, made her throat tight with emotion. "Easy, boy," she whispered, keeping her voice soft and steady despite the urgency building inside her. "We want to help." She stretched her hands out slowly, palms up, a gesture of peace. Ranger's eyes darted between her hands and the kitten, his muscles tense beneath his thick coat. The kitten stirred slightly, releasing a sound so weak and pitiful it barely qualified as a meow. Then, like a candle flame snuffed out, the tiny creature went completely limp against Ranger's side. Mia's heart nearly stopped. "Oh no," she gasped, her voice breaking. She turned to Alex, who stood rigid beside her, his face pale with concern. "We have to get her to a vet right now. She's fading fast." Alex nodded, but Ranger remained unmoved, his body still curved protectively around the unconscious kitten. His ears were pinned back, and though he wasn't growling anymore, the tension in his body spoke volumes. He didn't trust them, not with this precious life he'd been guarding. Mia took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm despite the panic clawing at her chest. She knew that any sudden movements might make things worse. Ranger had always responded to her gentle approach, and now, more than ever, she needed that connection to work. "Ranger," she cooed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sweet boy, I know you're protecting her. You've done such a good job." She inched closer, speaking in the same soothing tone she used when thunderstorms made him anxious. "But she needs help, buddy. The kind of help only a doctor can give." Ranger's eyes met hers, and something flickered in their depths, a glimmer of the trust they'd built over years together. Mia carefully extended her hand, moving slowly until she could rest it on his back. His fur was damp from the rain, but the warmth of his body seeped into her palm. "That's it," she murmured, gently stroking his back. "We're going to take care of her, I promise. You can come with us. We won't separate you." The seconds stretched into minutes, marked by the steady patter of rain and the shallow breathing of the kitten. Ranger remained still under Mia's touch, but she could feel the slight tremors running through his body, the physical manifestation of his internal struggle between protection and trust. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ranger's posture changed. The rigid line of his spine softened ever so slightly. He glanced at the kitten, then back at Mia, and slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, he shifted his body away from the tiny creature. Mia didn't waste a second. With gentle hands, she reached for the kitten, lifting her as carefully as if she were handling spun glass. The little body was terrifyingly light in her palms, barely weighing anything at all. Up close, the kitten's condition was even worse than she'd first thought. Beneath the matted fur and dried blood, she could feel every delicate rib, every fragile bone. "Alex," she called softly, "grab that clean towel from the laundry room." Her husband disappeared into the house, returning moments later with a soft blue towel. As Mia cradled the kitten close to her chest, Ranger followed her every movement, his eyes never leaving the small bundle. He stayed close, so close his fur brushed against her legs as she walked. Inside the house, Mia carefully wrapped the kitten in the towel, creating a warm cocoon around the tiny body. Ranger paced anxiously beside her, letting out small whines that tugged at her heart. Each time she adjusted the towel, his whimpers grew more insistent, as if he was afraid she might somehow hurt his precious charge. "It's okay," she assured him, though her own voice shook with worry. "We're going to help her." Alex already had his keys in hand, holding the front door open. "I'll drive," he said, his tone carrying the same urgency Mia felt. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, but the morning remained gray and somber as they hurried to their car. Ranger's anxiety seemed to spike as they stepped outside. He paced frantically between Mia and the car, his claws clicking against the driveway. When Alex opened the back door, Ranger didn't even wait for permission. He leapt inside, turning immediately to watch Mia approach with the kitten. As she settled into the back seat, Ranger pressed himself against her legs, his body trembling slightly. His eyes remained fixed on the towel-wrapped bundle in her arms, and his ears twitched at every small sound the kitten made. Alex slid behind the wheel, starting the engine with slightly shaking hands. As they backed out of the driveway, Mia looked down at the fragile life she held. The kitten's breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of her chest a desperate fight for survival. Ranger's head rested against her knee, and she could feel the tension in his body. "Hang in there, little one," Mia whispered, gently stroking the kitten through the towel. Her words seemed to float in the quiet car, a prayer and a promise wrapped into one. Beside her, Ranger let out a low, mournful whimper, a sound that spoke of understanding, of shared concern for the tiny creature they were racing to save. The veterinary clinic's waiting room was eerily quiet in the early morning hours, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over the empty chairs. Only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the tick of a wall clock broke the silence. As they rushed through the glass doors, the receptionist's eyes widened at the sight of their urgent faces and the small bundle in Mia's arms. "Please," Mia's voice trembled. "She needs help immediately." The receptionist didn't waste time with paperwork. She disappeared through a door and returned seconds later with a nurse in blue scrubs who quickly ushered them toward an exam room. As they moved down the sterile hallway, Ranger tried to follow, his nails clicking frantically against the linoleum floor. "Wait, boy," Alex said firmly, grabbing Ranger's collar. The German shepherd resisted, pulling against Alex's grip with a strength born of desperation. His eyes never left the bundle in Mia's arms as she disappeared into the exam room with the nurse. The moment the door closed, Ranger let out a high-pitched whine that echoed through the empty hallway. He scratched at the door, his claws leaving marks on the white paint. Alex had never seen him like this, so determined, so anxious. Even during thunderstorms or fireworks, Ranger had never shown such distress. "Easy, buddy," Alex murmured, trying to guide him away from the door. But Ranger wouldn't budge. He planted his feet firmly, continuing to whine and scratch intermittently, his entire body trembling with tension. Inside the exam room, the fluorescent lights were even brighter. The nurse helped Mia unwrap the towel while they waited for the veterinarian. The kitten looked even smaller under these harsh lights, her matted fur revealing more cuts and bruises than they'd initially noticed. Dr. Sarah Chen entered the room moments later, her face serious as she took in the scene before her. She moved with quick efficiency, examining the kitten with gentle hands, while asking Mia questions about where they'd found her. "Ranger, our dog. He was protecting her in his kennel," Mia explained, her voice thick with emotion. "We don't know how long she was there before we discovered her." Outside, Ranger's whining grew louder at the sound of Mia's voice. Dr. Chen's hands paused in their examination, her brow furrowing as she looked more closely at the kitten's injuries. The frown that crossed her face made Mia's heart sink. "These injuries," Dr. Chen said slowly, her voice grim. "They're not from another animal." She pointed to several marks on the kitten's body. "These are too precise, too deliberate. This wasn't an accident." Mia's breath caught in her throat. The implications of the vet's words hit her like a physical blow. "You mean—" Dr. Chen nodded, her expression grave. "Someone did this to her. These marks, they're consistent with intentional harm." Alex, who had managed to quiet Ranger enough to join them in the room, felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. Anger rose in his chest like a tide, hot and overwhelming. Who could do something like this to a defenseless animal? The thought of someone deliberately hurting this tiny creature made his stomach turn. "She's also severely malnourished," Dr. Chen continued, gently examining the kitten's emaciated frame. "If your dog hadn't found her when he did—" She paused, shaking her head. "She wouldn't have lasted another day." From his position by the door, Ranger suddenly let out a sharp, clear bark, so different from his earlier whines. It cut through the tension in the room like a knife, making everyone jump. The sound seemed to carry understanding, as if he comprehended exactly what the vet was saying about his role in saving the kitten's life. Dr. Chen worked quickly, cleaning the kitten's wounds and starting her on fluids. She explained each step as she worked: the antibiotics to prevent infection, the special formula they would need to start her on slowly, the careful monitoring her condition would require. The kitten remained unconscious through it all, her tiny chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. When they finally left the clinic, the morning sun had fully risen, though it felt like days had passed since they'd first discovered the kitten in Ranger's kennel. They sat in their parked car, both too shaken to speak immediately. Mia held the kitten, now wrapped in a fresh, soft blanket provided by the clinic, close to her chest. The tiny creature was still frail, but her breathing seemed stronger, more steady. "How did Ranger even find her?" Mia whispered, breaking the heavy silence. She looked down at the bundle in her arms, then back at their dog, who sat perfectly still in the back seat. His eyes hadn't left the kitten since they'd gotten in the car, his gaze intense and unwavering. Alex turned in his seat, studying Ranger's face. Their dog had always been intelligent, always seemed to understand more than a dog should. But this was different. Somehow, Ranger had known exactly what to do. He'd found this injured kitten, hidden her away, protected her until they could help. Ranger knew. He always knew. And now, Alex needed to figure out where this kitten had come from and who had hurt her. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across their living room as Alex and Mia finally returned home. The drive had been silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts about the injured kitten that now lay bundled in Mia's arms. Ranger hadn't relaxed for a moment during the journey, his intense gaze fixed on the small bundle from his position in the back seat. As soon as they stepped through their front door, Ranger was at Mia's side, his nose gently nudging her arm. His whine was soft but insistent, trying to get a better look at his tiny charge. Mia couldn't help but smile at his concern, despite her exhaustion. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, kneeling down so he could see better. "She's still here." Alex watched as Mia moved carefully to the coffee table, where she had already prepared a makeshift bed. She'd taken a shoebox from their closet and lined it with their softest towels, creating a warm nest for the fragile kitten. With gentle hands, she lowered the bundle into the box, adjusting the blankets around the tiny body. The kitten barely stirred, still weak from her ordeal. Her matted fur had been cleaned at the vet's office, revealing a coat that might have been white and gray beneath all the dirt. She looked even smaller now, curled up in the shoebox that seemed enormous compared to her tiny frame. Ranger immediately settled himself beside the box, laying his large head on the edge. His brown eyes remained fixed on the kitten, watching every shallow breath she took. The contrast between the massive German shepherd and the tiny kitten was striking, yet there was something incredibly tender in the way he watched over her. "I'll get her formula ready," Mia said, heading to the kitchen where they'd placed the supplies from the vet. The sound of cabinets opening and closing, followed by the quiet hum of the microwave, filled the house. Alex stood in the living room, unable to take his eyes off the scene before him. Ranger's protective posture, the tiny kitten fighting for her life, the gentle way Mia prepared the formula, it all seemed surreal. But what made his stomach churn was the knowledge that someone had deliberately caused this suffering. The vet's words kept echoing in his mind. "These injuries, they're not from another animal. This wasn't an accident." Mia returned with a small bowl of warm formula and a dropper, kneeling beside the box. Ranger lifted his head slightly, making room for her but refusing to move away completely. With practiced care, though she'd never done this before, Mia filled the dropper and brought it to the kitten's mouth. "Come on, little one," she coaxed softly, placing a tiny drop on the kitten's lips. At first, there was no response, and Alex felt his heart sink. But then, after a few more careful drops, the kitten's pink tongue darted out weakly, accepting the nourishment. "That's it," Mia encouraged, her voice thick with emotion. She continued the slow process of feeding, one drop at a time, while Ranger watched intently. The kitten managed to take in several droppers full of formula before turning her head away, exhausted by even this small effort. Alex found himself pacing the living room, his mind racing. Someone in their neighborhood, someone nearby, had done this. The thought made his blood boil. He wanted to do something, anything, to find whoever was responsible. But where would he even start? The day passed slowly, with Mia tending to the kitten every few hours, as instructed by Dr. Chen. Ranger refused to leave his post, only getting up when absolutely necessary. Even then, he would hurry back to his position beside the box, as if afraid the kitten might disappear in his absence. That night, Alex lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep eluded him completely. The steady sound of Ranger's paws on the hardwood floor echoed through the house as the dog made his rounds, checking on the kitten every few minutes. The soft padding would stop by the living room, pause for a moment, then continue back down the hallway, only to repeat the circuit again shortly after. In the quiet darkness, Alex's mind wouldn't stop working. Something about this situation wasn't adding up. The rhythmic sound of Ranger's pacing seemed to help his thoughts align, like pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together. Where did Ranger actually find the kitten? The question hit him suddenly, making him sit up in bed. They'd assumed Ranger had found her in his kennel because that's where they'd discovered them both. But was that really where he'd found her? Or had he brought her there, to the safest place he knew, from somewhere else? Alex slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Mia. He made his way down the hallway, where Ranger immediately noticed him, lifting his head alertly from his position near the shoebox. Their eyes met in the dim light, and something in Ranger's gaze seemed to understand Alex's questioning. Moving to the back door, Alex turned the handle quietly. The cold night air hit his skin as he stepped outside, making him wish he'd grabbed a jacket. But his mind was too focused on this new train of thought to care about the chill. His eyes traveled across their backyard, finally settling on Ranger's kennel. The sturdy structure stood at the far end of the yard, barely visible in the darkness. Alex studied it thoughtfully. Ranger was an indoor dog. He only used the kennel occasionally during the day when he wanted some quiet time. It wasn't where he slept. It wasn't where he spent most of his time. So why would he have found an injured kitten there? The question hung in the air as Alex stood in the cold night, his bare feet on the deck, looking out at the kennel. Behind him, he heard the soft click of Ranger's nails on the wood as the dog joined him outside, alert and watchful. Days later, the morning sun crept through the windows, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. Alex stood by the counter, his coffee untouched, watching Ranger make his usual check on the kitten. The tiny creature had made it through the night, taking small amounts of formula whenever Mia fed her. Though still weak, her breathing seemed steadier now. Alex's mind hadn't stopped working since his revelation the night before. He knew they needed to figure out where Ranger had actually found the kitten. Setting his coffee mug down with determination, he walked to the hook by the front door, where they kept Ranger's leash. The familiar jingle of metal clips usually sent Ranger bounding over, tail wagging with excitement for his morning walk. But this time, when Alex held up the blue leash, Ranger didn't move. The German Shepherd stood perfectly still by the back door, his posture rigid and alert, dark eyes fixed on something outside. "Come on, boy," Alex called, shaking the leash slightly. Still, Ranger didn't budge. His ears twitched at Alex's voice, but his attention remained focused on whatever had caught his interest beyond the door. Alex frowned, lowering the leash. He'd never seen Ranger ignore a walk before. The dog's behavior was deliberate, almost like he was trying to communicate something important. Mia appeared from the hallway, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She'd been up every few hours with the kitten, and exhaustion showed on her face. Still, her eyes were sharp as she took in the scene before her. "What's wrong?" she asked, noting Alex's confused expression and Ranger's unusual stance. "He won't come for his walk," Alex explained, gesturing with the leash. "He just keeps staring outside." Mia watched Ranger for a moment, her head tilted thoughtfully. The German Shepherd's body language was clear. He wanted to go outside, but not for a regular walk. There was purpose in his stillness. "What if we let him lead?" she suggested, moving closer to Alex. "No leash, just let him show us where he wants to go." Alex hesitated, glancing between the leash in his hand and Ranger's steadfast position. They never let Ranger off-leash outside their yard. It wasn't safe, and it wasn't allowed in their neighborhood. But something about this felt different, important. "You think he's trying to tell us something?" Alex asked, though he already knew the answer. Ranger had been trying to tell them something since the moment they found him in that kennel with the kitten. Mia nodded. "He found her somewhere. Maybe he wants to show us where." After another moment's hesitation, Alex hung the leash back on its hook. The moment he did, Ranger's head turned toward them, his ears perking up. He knew they understood. "Okay, boy," Alex said softly, moving toward the back door. "Show us." Mia quickly grabbed their jackets. The morning air still held a chill, and joined them. As Alex reached for the door handle, Ranger's body tensed with anticipation. The instant the door swung open, he bolted. Alex's heart jumped to his throat, but Ranger wasn't running away. His movements were purposeful, directed. He paused at the end of their driveway, looking back to make sure they were following, then continued down the street at a pace they could match. Alex and Mia hurried after him, their footsteps echoing in the quiet morning. Most of their neighbors were still asleep, their houses dark and silent. Ranger moved with certainty, taking them past familiar homes and perfectly manicured lawns. Then suddenly, he stopped. Alex felt his breath catch in his throat. They were standing in front of Jeff Carter's house, the neighbor who had moved in 6 months ago. Alex barely knew him. Jeff kept to himself, rarely speaking to anyone on the street. The few times they had interacted, something about Jeff had made Alex uneasy, though he'd never been able to explain why. Ranger's posture had changed completely. His ears were pinned back, his body low to the ground. A deep, rumbling growl emerged from his throat, a sound that made the hair on Alex's arms stand up. The dog's eyes were fixed on something, and Alex followed his gaze. There at the curb sat a large black trash bin. It was garbage day, and Jeff had pushed his bin out for collection like everyone else on the street. But something about the way Ranger stared at it made Alex's stomach twist. Moving slowly, conscious of how exposed they were on the street, Alex approached the bin. He glanced inside, his eyes scanning the contents. At first, all he saw were the usual things: crumpled newspapers, empty beer cans, food containers. But then, half buried under the debris, a flash of pink caught his eye. Reaching in, his fingers closed around something small and light. As he pulled it out, he felt his stomach turn to ice. In his hand was a tiny pink collar, its surface scratched and damaged. Small, dark stains marked the fabric, stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Alex's fingers tightened around the collar until his knuckles went white. The implications of what he held made him feel sick. The vet's words echoed in his mind. Oh, these injuries. They weren't an accident. Beside him, Mia had gone very still. She stared at the collar, then at Jeff's house, her face pale. The morning suddenly felt much colder. Alex turned toward the house, his jaw clenched tight. The windows were dark, the blinds drawn shut against the morning light. But something made him pause, a slight movement behind one of the blinds, a shadow shifting in the darkness. Someone was watching them. They didn't have proof, not yet. The collar alone wasn't enough to prove Jeff had hurt the kitten. But as Alex stood there, holding the damaged collar while Ranger growled beside him, he was certain Jeff had done this, and somehow they needed to prove it. Back home. The afternoon light filtered through the living room windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Alex couldn't stop moving, his footsteps creating a steady rhythm as he paced back and forth. The pink collar lay on the coffee table like a silent accusation, its scratched surface and dark stains telling a story that made his blood boil. Mia sat quietly on the couch, her eyes following Alex's movements. Every few minutes, she glanced at the makeshift bed they'd created for Clover, the name they'd given the kitten that morning. The tiny creature was curled up against Ranger's warm fur, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that seemed stronger than the day before. Ranger hadn't left Clover's side since they'd returned from Jeff's house. His protective instincts seemed to have grown even stronger, as if he sensed the gravity of what they'd discovered. "What do we do?" Mia finally asked, breaking the tense silence. Her voice was soft, but carried the weight of their shared concern. Alex stopped pacing, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we can't just sit here and do nothing." They'd spent the last hour discussing their options, but each one seemed to lead to a dead end. The collar was evidence, but it wasn't enough. Anyone could argue it had been thrown away because it was damaged, not because of something sinister. "We could call the police," Mia suggested, though her tone indicated she already knew the problems with that idea. Alex shook his head. "And tell them what? That our dog found an injured kitten and we found a collar in someone's trash? They'll tell us to file a report and nothing will happen." His voice carried an edge of bitterness. "Maybe we could talk to the other neighbors," Mia offered. "See if anyone else has noticed anything strange around Jeff's house." "He'll hear about it," Alex said. "And if he is hurting animals—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The thought made him sick. Clover stirred in her sleep, letting out a tiny mewl. Ranger immediately lifted his head, checking on her before gently nuzzling her back to sleep. The sight made Alex's chest tighten with a mixture of tenderness and rage. He stopped by the window, staring out at the darkening sky. The street lights were starting to come on, casting pools of yellow light on the pavement. In the growing darkness, Jeff's house looked especially forbidding. Suddenly, Alex straightened. An idea was forming in his mind. Not a good one, perhaps, but one that might give them the answers they needed. "I'm going to check his property," he announced, turning back to face Mia. Mia's eyes widened in alarm. "Alex, that's dangerous," she protested, standing up. "If he catches you—" "I just need to see if there's more," Alex interrupted, already moving toward the coat rack. "There has to be something else, some kind of proof. The vet said Clover wasn't the only one, remember? There might be others." "Alex, please," Mia pleaded, following him. "We should think about this. What if he sees you? What if he has cameras?" But Alex was already shrugging into his dark jacket. His mind was made up. "I'll be careful," he promised, checking his phone to make sure it was fully charged. "I just need to look around. If I see anything suspicious, we'll have more to go on when we talk to the police." Mia grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "At least wait until it's darker," she insisted. "And take your phone. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you call me immediately." Alex nodded, pulling her into a quick hug. "I'll be fine," he assured her, though his heart was already beating faster at the thought of what he was about to do. The next few hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Alex sat with Mia, pretending to watch TV while they waited for night to fall completely. Ranger seemed to sense the tension in the room, occasionally lifting his head to look at them before returning to his vigil over Clover. Finally, around 10 o'clock, Alex stood up. The street outside was quiet, most houses dark except for the occasional living room light. Perfect conditions for what he needed to do. "Be careful," Mia whispered as he headed for the door. Her face was pale with worry. Alex gave her what he hoped was a reassuring smile before stepping out into the night. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of someone's fireplace. He walked casually down the sidewalk, trying to appear as normal as possible in case anyone was watching. Jeff's house loomed ahead, its windows dark except for a dim light in what Alex assumed was the kitchen. The porch light flickered erratically, creating dancing shadows on the worn wooden steps. Something about the house felt wrong. Maybe it was just Alex's imagination, colored by what they discovered that morning, but the place seemed to radiate an aura of menace. The overgrown bushes, the peeling paint, the crooked shutters, everything about it spoke of neglect and hidden darkness. Alex walked past the house slowly, his senses on high alert. He couldn't see any security cameras, but that didn't mean they weren't there. The curtains were drawn tight, preventing any view of the interior. As he turned the corner toward the side of the house, his foot caught on something in the grass. He froze, heart pounding, before realizing it was just an uneven patch of ground. Kneeling down to steady himself, he ran his fingers through the cool dirt. That's when he felt it, a small, distinct impression in the soft earth. His breath caught in his throat as he leaned closer, squinting in the dim light. There, pressed into the dirt, was a tiny paw print. Fresh, small, exactly the size a kitten would make. Alex's pulse quickened as his eyes followed the direction of the prints. They led away from the sidewalk, creating a faint trail through the grass, straight toward Jeff's backyard. The next day, the morning sun cast long shadows across Alex's kitchen as he drummed his fingers nervously on the counter, phone pressed to his ear. He'd been waiting for the vet's office to open since dawn, unable to shake the feeling that Clover wasn't an isolated case. "Dr. Martinez's office. How can I help you?" a cheerful voice answered. "Hi, this is Alex Smith. You treated a kitten we brought in yesterday?" His voice was steady despite his racing heart. "I needed to ask something important." There was a pause followed by shuffling papers. "Yes, Mr. Smith. How's the little one doing?" "She's improving," Alex said quickly, glancing toward the living room where Clover lay curled against Ranger. "But I need to know. Have there been any other cases? Other injured kittens brought in recently?" The receptionist's voice changed, becoming more serious. "Let me get Dr. Martinez for you." While he waited, Alex watched Mia preparing Clover's morning formula. The kitten had grown stronger overnight, but her wounds still looked angry and raw. The memory of those injuries made his jaw clench. "Mr. Smith?" Dr. Martinez's voice came through clear and professional. "I understand you're asking about similar cases?" "Yes," Alex confirmed, straightening. "Have you seen any other kittens with injuries like Clover's?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Finally, Dr. Martinez spoke, her voice grave. "Actually, yes. We've had 2 other cases in the past month. Both kittens showed similar patterns of injury." Alex's stomach dropped. "From the same area?" "Both were found near your neighborhood," she confirmed. "One behind the grocery store on Oak Street, another in Thompson Park. The injuries were consistent with what we saw on your kitten." Alex's free hand curled into a fist. "And they were deliberate? Like Clover's?" "Unfortunately, yes." Dr. Martinez's voice carried a note of contained anger. "The wounds showed clear signs of intentional harm. We reported both cases to animal services, but without any witnesses." Alex thanked her and hung up, his mind racing. 2 other kittens. Same injuries. Same area. It wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. Mia looked up as he entered the living room, immediately reading the tension in his face. "What did they say?" He told her everything, watching as her expression shifted from concern to horror. "We have to do something," she whispered, unconsciously pulling Clover closer to her chest. Alex was already pulling up the number for animal services on his phone. His hand shook slightly as he dialed, but his voice remained firm as he explained everything. The injured kitten, the collar in Jeff's trash, the paw prints leading to his yard, and now the vet's confirmation of other cases. The woman on the other end listened carefully, asking detailed questions about dates and locations. "We take these reports very seriously," she assured him. "We'll send someone to investigate, but these cases can take time. We need to gather evidence, build a proper case." "How long?" Alex interrupted, trying to keep the frustration out of his voice. "It could be a few days, maybe longer. We have to follow proper procedures." "A few days." Alex thought about the fresh paw prints he'd found, about the desperate meowing he thought he'd heard, about how close Clover had come to dying. How many more animals could Jeff hurt in a few days? He thanked the woman and hung up, his decision already made. He couldn't wait for bureaucracy, not when there might be other animals suffering right now. The rest of the day passed in a blur of tension and preparation. Alex watched Jeff's house from their living room window, noting his routines. Every evening around 6, Jeff would drive to the grocery store, returning about an hour later with a single bag of groceries. As the sun began to set, Alex saw Jeff's front door open. Right on schedule. The man emerged, keys jingling in his hand, and walked to his car. Alex waited until the vehicle disappeared around the corner before moving. "Be careful," Mia pleaded, grabbing his arm. "Please." Alex nodded, giving her hand a quick squeeze. "I'll call if I see anything suspicious. Just keep your phone close." The evening air was cool against his face as he stepped outside. He'd chosen dark clothes, a black jacket, dark jeans, hoping to blend with the growing shadows. His heart thundered in his chest as he approached Jeff's property, every step feeling like it might trigger some hidden alarm. The house loomed before him, its windows dark and uninviting. Alex kept to the edges of the property, using the overgrown bushes for cover as he made his way toward the backyard. Each crack of a twig under his feet made him freeze, certain someone would hear. The backyard was worse than he'd imagined. Weeds grew unchecked between pieces of broken furniture and rusted tools. The grass was patchy and brown, creating strange shadows in the dim light. Alex moved carefully, testing each step to avoid making noise. That's when he saw it, a basement window set low in the foundation. Unlike the others, this one was cracked open slightly, as if someone had forgotten to close it completely. As Alex drew closer, his blood turned to ice in his veins. A sound drifted up from the darkness below, a tiny, desperate meowing. Alex dropped to his knees beside the window, pressing his ear closer. The meowing came again, weaker this time, followed by a scratching sound. Something was down there, something small and frightened. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone, ready to call Mia, ready to call animal services, ready to call anyone who could help. But before he could dial, another sound froze him in place. Footsteps. They came from inside the basement, slow and deliberate. The meowing suddenly stopped. Alex held his breath, not daring to move. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by something else. A second set of sounds, like something being dragged across concrete. Alex pressed himself against the house wall, heart hammering so loud he was sure it would give him away. The footsteps stopped directly beneath the window. Someone was down there, and whatever else was with them, it wasn't making a sound anymore. Alex pressed himself flat against the cold brick wall of Jeff's house, his heart thundering so loudly he feared it might give him away. The meowing continued from below, soft, desperate sounds that made his skin crawl. Something rustled in the darkness of the basement, a shifting noise that spoke of movement. Then came the footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing against concrete. His breath caught in his throat. The sounds were unmistakable now. Someone was definitely down there. The footsteps grew closer to the window, and Alex carefully backed away, trying to keep his movement silent against the patchy grass. His foot caught on an exposed root, nearly sending him stumbling, but he caught himself just in time. The implications hit him like a physical blow. If Jeff was down there right now, this wasn't just about finding injured animals and hurting them. He was keeping them prisoner. The thought made Alex's stomach turn. How many were down there? How long had this been going on? Another meow drifted up from the basement, weaker this time, followed by what sounded like metal scraping against concrete. Alex wanted nothing more than to look through that window again, to see what was happening, but the risk was too great. If Jeff caught him. Moving as quietly as possible, Alex retreated from the house. Every step felt too loud, every breath too heavy. The overgrown bushes that had hidden his approach now seemed to grab at his clothes, threatening to rustle and give him away. It took everything he had not to break into a run until he was safely away from Jeff's property. Once he was back on the sidewalk, Alex's pace quickened. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone, checking the time. Jeff would be back from the store soon. The thought spurred him to move faster, and he didn't slow down until he reached his own front door. Mia was waiting in the living room, her face tight with worry. Ranger lay at her feet, but his head snapped up the moment Alex entered. The dog's ears were forward, alert, as if he could sense Alex's distress. "I need to call animal services again," Alex said, already dialing. His voice came out rougher than he expected. "He's got them in there. He's keeping them locked up." The phone rang 3 times before someone answered. Alex recognized the same operator from earlier that day. He tried to keep his voice steady as he explained what he'd heard, emphasizing the urgency of the situation. "Sir, I understand your concern," the operator said, her tone professional but sympathetic. "I want you to know that we're already looking into this case. An investigator has been assigned." "But you don't understand," Alex interrupted, pacing the living room. "I heard them. There are animals trapped in his basement right now. They need help now." "Mr. Smith, I hear what you're saying, but we have to follow proper protocols. We can't just break into someone's house without sufficient evidence and proper warrants. The investigator will—" "How long?" Alex demanded. "How long before you actually do something?" The operator's voice remained calm. "The investigator will be conducting interviews in the neighborhood tomorrow. They'll be building a case that will hold up legally. I know it's frustrating, but this is how we have to handle these situations." Alex ran a hand through his hair, fighting back his frustration. "And what happens to those animals while we wait?" "Sir, please don't try to handle this yourself. Let us do our job. If you have any new information, call us immediately." The line went dead, leaving Alex standing in the middle of the living room, phone still pressed to his ear. Mia approached slowly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "What did you hear?" she asked softly. Alex dropped onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. There were meowing sounds coming from the basement, and footsteps. Someone was down there with them. He looked up at Mia, his eyes haunted. "He's keeping them locked up, Mia. Who knows how many are down there?" Mia's grip on his arm tightened. "Alex, please don't go back there alone. It's too dangerous." "But what choice do we have?" Alex gestured toward Clover, who was sleeping peacefully in her box. "Look how close she came to dying. What about the others? What if they don't have another night?" "And what if Jeff catches you?" Mia's voice cracked slightly. "What then? He's clearly dangerous. If he's willing to hurt innocent animals, what would he do to someone snooping around his property?" Alex fell silent, knowing she had a point. The image of that basement window kept floating through his mind, along with the sounds of those desperate meows. The thought of walking away, of leaving those animals there for even one more night, made him feel sick. "Just promise me you won't do anything rash," Mia pleaded. "Please, we'll figure something out, but not like this. Not by putting yourself in danger." Alex nodded slowly, but the promise felt hollow. How could he just go to bed knowing what was happening just a few houses away? That night, sleep refused to come. Alex lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying everything he'd seen and heard. The pink collar in the trash, the paw prints leading to Jeff's yard, the sounds from the basement. It all pointed to something horrible happening right under their noses. Ranger had followed him to bed, breaking his usual routine of guarding Clover. The German Shepherd lay beside the bed, but he wasn't sleeping either. His ears remained perked, his body tense and alert. Every now and then, he would lift his head, staring intently at the bedroom door. Alex watched him, wondering what Ranger sensed that humans couldn't. The dog had known about Clover before anyone else, had somehow found her and protected her. Now he lay here, watching and waiting, as if he knew something was coming. The clock on the nightstand showed 2:47 a.m. In just a few hours, Animal Services would begin their investigation. They would conduct their interviews, gather their evidence, build their case. But how many animals would suffer in the meantime? How many might not survive the wait? Ranger's ears twitched, and he let out a soft whine. His eyes remained fixed on the door, unwavering in their vigilance. The next morning, sharp knocking jolted Alex awake. He blinked, disoriented, as sunlight streamed through the bedroom window. The knocking continued, more urgent now. Beside him, Mia stirred, pushing herself up on her elbows. "Who could that be?" she mumbled, glancing at the clock. It was barely 7. Alex swung his legs out of bed, his heart already picking up speed. Something about the frantic rhythm of those knocks set him on edge. He hurried down the hallway, Ranger close at his heels. The knocking grew louder as he approached the front door. Through the frosted glass, he could make out a small, hunched figure. When he pulled the door open, Mrs. Thompson stood on his porch, clutching her purse like a lifeline. The elderly woman's face was pale, her usually neat gray hair slightly disheveled. "I saw him," she blurted out before Alex could speak. Her hands trembled as they gripped her purse tighter. "I saw Jeff last night." Alex's pulse quickened. "Mrs. Thompson, come inside." He guided her to the living room just as Mia appeared, hastily pulling on a robe. Mrs. Thompson sank into their armchair, her eyes darting between them. "I couldn't sleep last night," she continued, her voice shaking. "I was watching out my window. I do that sometimes when I can't sleep, you know? And I saw him, Jeff. He was carrying something." Alex leaned forward, every muscle in his body tense. What was he carrying? Something small. Mrs. Thompson's fingers worked nervously at the clasp of her purse. It was wrapped in a blanket, but she swallowed hard. It was crying. I heard it crying. Alex's blood ran cold. Beside him, Mia made a small, distressed sound. "What time was this?" Alex asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Around midnight, I think. He came from the direction of the park, carrying that bundle. And when he got to his door..." Mrs. Thompson's voice dropped to a whisper. "I saw it move. Whatever was in that blanket was alive." Ranger, who had been sitting quietly by Alex's feet, suddenly stood up, his ears forward and alert. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "I should have called someone right then," Mrs. Thompson continued, wringing her hands. "But I was scared. Jeff, he's not right. There's something wrong with him. The way he looked around before going inside, like he was making sure no one saw him." She shuddered. "But I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that crying sound. So I came here first thing." Alex ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. This was it. Actual witness testimony. Someone else had seen Jeff's suspicious behavior. Maybe now Animal Services would have to take immediate action. The morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. Alex called Animal Services again, reporting Mrs. Thompson's account. They assured him an officer would be there that afternoon. Around 2 o'clock, a white van with the Animal Services logo pulled up in front of Jeff's house. Alex watched from his porch as an officer in a Navy uniform approached Jeff's door. The knocking echoed down the quiet street. It took several minutes before Jeff answered. Even from his position, Alex could see the barely contained anger in Jeff's posture as he spoke with the officer. Their voices carried across the yard in fragments. No right to... Complaints from neighbors. Need to investigate. Jeff's voice grew louder, more aggressive. He stepped forward, forcing the officer to take a step back. You got a warrant? The officer maintained her professional demeanor. Sir, we're simply responding to multiple reports. Multiple reports? Jeff barked out a laugh that made Alex's skin crawl. You mean the nosy neighbors making up stories? Unless you got a warrant, we're done here. The officer tried to reason with him, but Jeff wasn't having it. He smirked, a cruel twist of his lips that made Alex's fists clench. They got no warrant, he muttered, just loud enough to carry across the yard before slamming the door in the officer's face. Alex watched as the officer returned to her van, making notes on a clipboard. His entire body thrummed with suppressed rage. How many more animals would suffer while they waited for paperwork? How many wouldn't survive another night in that basement? The afternoon faded into evening, and Alex's anger didn't subside. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing hour. He thought about Clover, how close she'd come to death. He thought about Mrs. Thompson's description of the crying bundle. He thought about those desperate meows he'd heard from the basement. The law was supposed to protect the innocent, but right now, the law was protecting the wrong person. After dinner, Alex sat in the living room, watching the sun set through the window. Mia had gone to bed early, exhausted from the day's stress. Ranger lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to whine softly. Alex's eyes fell on the flashlight sitting on the coffee table. He had placed it there earlier, almost without thinking. Now he picked it up, testing its weight in his hand. He couldn't wait anymore. He couldn't sit here doing nothing while more animals suffered. If the law wouldn't act tonight, he would. Standing up, Alex grabbed his jacket. Ranger immediately rose with him, but Alex pointed firmly at the ground. Stay, he commanded softly. The last thing he needed was Ranger giving him away with a bark or growl. The dog whined, but obeyed, watching with worried eyes as Alex moved toward the door. Before stepping out, Alex glanced back at his faithful companion. Watch over them, he whispered. The night air was cool against his face as he stepped outside. Gripping the flashlight tightly, Alex began walking toward Jeff's house. He didn't care about waiting anymore. He didn't care about proper procedures or legal protocols. Tonight, he was going to find out exactly what was in that basement. Hours later, the night wrapped around Alex like a cold blanket as he crept through Jeff's backyard. His footsteps were careful and measured, each one placed with deliberate precision on the damp grass. The only sound was his heartbeat, thundering so loudly in his ears that he was certain it would betray his presence. Moonlight cast long shadows across the yard, creating dark patches where anything or anyone could be hiding. Alex kept close to these shadows, using them as cover as he approached the basement window. The same window where he'd heard those desperate cries earlier. It was still cracked open, just as he'd seen before. A thin strip of darkness gaped between the frame and the sill, like a mouth waiting to swallow him whole. Alex's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the window's edge. The metal felt cold against his fingers, almost burning with its chill. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was it. No turning back now. Carefully, he pushed against the window. It resisted at first, years of rust fighting against his effort. And then, with a slight groan that seemed deafening in the quiet night, it began to move. Alex froze at the sound, his heart skipping several beats as he waited to see if anyone had heard. Seconds ticked by. Nothing. He pushed again, gentler this time, until the gap was wide enough for him to slip through. That's when the smell hit him, a wave of stench so powerful it made him physically recoil. It was unlike anything he'd ever encountered before, a horrific mixture of waste, decay, and something else, something worse, the smell of fear and suffering. Alex gagged, his hand flying to his nose and mouth. His eyes watered as he fought against the urge to vomit. Whatever was happening down there was even worse than he'd imagined. Despite every instinct screaming at him to run, to get away from that awful smell, Alex forced himself to focus. He had to do this. Had to know what was happening in this basement. Those animals needed him. The window frame was just big enough for him to squeeze through. He turned around, lowering himself feet first into the darkness. His shoes found purchase on something solid, probably a shelf or table, and he carefully shifted his weight, testing its stability. The makeshift step held. Alex lowered himself further, trying to move as silently as possible. His foot found another surface, this time definitely concrete, and he eased himself down until both feet were firmly planted on the basement floor. The darkness was absolute. Alex could barely see his hand in front of his face. The air felt thick and heavy, almost alive with an oppressive energy that made his skin crawl. He pulled out his flashlight, his thumb hovering over the switch. For a moment, he hesitated. Part of him didn't want to see what was down here. Part of him wanted to climb back out that window and pretend he'd never come. But then he thought of Clover, how close she'd come to death. How many others like her were down here right now? He clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness like a knife, illuminating a scene that turned Alex's blood to ice. In the far corner of the basement, partially hidden behind some old boxes, stood a stack of 3 metal cages. They were small, too small, and rusted, with newspaper lining their bottoms. And inside them were kittens. Alex's hand shook as he directed the beam closer. In the top cage, 2 tiny bodies huddled together, their fur matted and dirty. Their eyes, reflecting the flashlight's beam, were wide with terror. They didn't make a sound, just stared at him with a fear that spoke of learned silence. The middle cage held another kitten, this one even smaller than the others. It was trying to press itself into the corner, as far from the light as possible. Its tiny body trembled violently, and Alex could see patches where fur had been torn away. But it was the bottom cage that made his stomach lurch. Another kitten lay there, completely motionless. Its small body was curled up as if sleeping, but there was something wrong about how still it was. Too still. Unnaturally still. Alex swallowed hard against the bile rising in his throat. The reality of what he was seeing hit him like a physical blow. Jeff wasn't just hurting these animals, he was torturing them, keeping them locked up in these tiny cages, letting them suffer, letting them... His thoughts were interrupted by a sound that made his entire body go rigid. Above his head, a floorboard creaked. Alex froze, his breath catching in his throat. The sound came again. Another creak, followed by the distinct thud of footsteps. Jeff was still in the house, and he was moving around upstairs. The beam of Alex's flashlight trembled across the basement walls as his hand shook. He stood completely still, barely daring to breathe, as the footsteps continued overhead. Each step seemed to echo in his ears, mixing with the frantic pounding of his heart. One of the kittens in the top cage shifted slightly, causing the metal to rattle. The sound, though tiny, seemed to explode in the silence of the basement. Alex's heart nearly stopped. The footsteps paused. Alex's heart hammered against his ribs as he backed toward the basement window, his feet moving with agonizing slowness across the concrete floor. Each step had to be silent, precise. The beam of his flashlight trembled across the dingy walls, casting dancing shadows that made everything more terrifying. The kittens in their rusted cages began to stir, perhaps sensing his retreat. Their tiny voices, weak and desperate, pierced the heavy air. One of them pressed its small face against the cage bars, letting out a sound that was barely more than a whisper. But to Alex's ears, it might as well have been a siren. His chest constricted painfully. These helpless creatures needed him. The thought of leaving them here, in this dank basement with that monster upstairs, made him feel physically ill. His conscience screamed at him to do something, anything, to help them right now. But the rational part of his brain, the part that was keeping him alive, knew better. Jeff was bigger than him, and who knew what kind of weapons he might have. If Alex got caught down here, he wouldn't be able to help anyone. The best thing he could do right now was get out and bring back help. The window seemed miles away as he inched backward. Each step felt like an eternity. The concrete floor was uneven, scattered with debris that threatened to trip him or make noise. Alex kept his movements slow and deliberate, though everything in him wanted to sprint for the exit. A sudden bang from upstairs made him jump. The sound was loud, like something heavy being dropped or thrown. Alex's breath caught in his throat as he heard Jeff's heavy footsteps moving across the floor above. The footsteps were purposeful, directed, getting closer. Time was running out. Alex's hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped his phone as he pulled it from his pocket. The screen's glow seemed impossibly bright in the darkness. He fumbled with it, trying to open the camera while keeping the flashlight steady. Finally, the camera app opened. Alex started taking pictures as quickly as he could, his finger jabbing repeatedly at the screen. He captured everything: the stack of rusted cages, the terrified kittens huddled inside them, the filthy conditions they were kept in. He made sure to get clear shots of the injuries visible on the living kittens and the still form of the one that hadn't moved. Each second felt like a gamble with fate. The footsteps above continued their steady progression. Jeff was definitely moving toward the basement door. Alex's hands were slick with sweat as he tried to capture as much evidence as possible. Then came the sound that turned his blood to ice, the distinct creak of the basement door opening. Footsteps on the stairs, heavy, slow, deliberate. Alex's body moved on pure instinct. He shoved his phone back into his pocket and lunged for the window. His hands found the ledge, fingers gripping the cold metal with desperate strength. He could hear Jeff's boots on the wooden stairs, each step bringing him closer to the basement floor. Using every ounce of strength he had, Alex pulled himself up toward the window. His muscles screamed in protest as he hauled his body through the narrow opening. A nail or piece of metal caught his shirt, tearing the fabric, but he barely noticed. Just as his feet cleared the window, he heard Jeff's boots hit the concrete basement floor. Alex tumbled onto the grass, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. The cool night air hit his face, and he gulped it down gratefully, trying to fight off the wave of dizziness that threatened to overwhelm him. A shadow moved beside him, and Alex nearly cried out, until he recognized the familiar form of Ranger. The German shepherd stood perfectly still, his ears alert, watching Alex with intelligent eyes. There was no bark, no whine, not a sound. It was as if Ranger understood exactly what was happening and knew to stay quiet. Alex didn't waste time wondering how or why Ranger had followed him. He scrambled to his feet and ran, his shoes slipping slightly on the damp grass. Ranger kept pace beside him, moving with the same silent intensity. They crossed Jeff's backyard in seconds, staying low and keeping to the shadows. Alex's lungs burned as he pushed himself to run faster, expecting at any moment to hear Jeff's angry shouts behind him. But there was only silence, broken by the soft sound of his and Ranger's footfalls on the grass. They didn't slow down until they reached their own backyard. Alex's hands were shaking so badly he could barely get the back door open. Once inside, he collapsed onto the kitchen floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Ranger stood guard by the door, his posture still alert and protective. With trembling fingers, Alex pulled out his phone. The pictures were there, dark and a bit blurry, but clear enough to show the horror of what was happening in Jeff's basement. He opened his email and began attaching them to a message for animal services, his fingers flying across the screen despite their shaking. He wrote a quick but detailed description of what he'd seen, including the location of the basement window and the number of kittens he'd found. He mentioned Mrs. Thompson's testimony about seeing Jeff with a wrapped bundle and his own earlier observations. Then, before he could second-guess himself, he hit send. The evidence was out there now. There was no way Jeff could deny what was happening in his basement. No way he could talk his way out of this or hide the truth. The authorities would have to act. Alex sat there on the kitchen floor, his back against the cabinets, until his breathing finally steadied. Ranger moved closer, pressing his warm body against Alex's side. The dog's presence was comforting, grounding. Together, they waited for morning. When the sun finally rose, painting the kitchen in soft golden light, Alex heard what he'd been waiting for, the sound of multiple vehicles pulling up outside. He got to his feet, his muscles protesting from the night's activities, and went to the window. 3 police cars and an animal control van were parked in front of Jeff's house. Officers were already approaching his front door, and this time, they held a piece of paper in their hands. A warrant. Their arrival broke the usual quiet of the street, drawing curious faces to windows and bringing neighbors out onto their porches. Alex stood on his own porch, his heart pounding with anticipation. The events of the previous night still felt surreal. The basement, the photos, the desperate dash to escape. But now, watching the officers step out of their vehicles with determined expressions and an official warrant in hand, it all became very real. Mia appeared beside him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Ranger sat at their feet, his posture alert and focused on Jeff's house. The German shepherd's ears were perked forward, as if he understood the significance of what was about to happen. The officers approached Jeff's front door with practiced efficiency. Their knock was firm, authoritative, nothing like the hesitant approach Animal Services had made the day before. The sound echoed through the quiet morning air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the door swung open, revealing Jeff in wrinkled clothes, looking like he just rolled out of bed. His usual arrogant sneer was firmly in place, but it faltered visibly at the sight of the police badges. "Mr. Carter," one of the officers said, his voice carrying clearly across the morning air, "we have a warrant to search your property." Jeff's expression shifted, confusion mixing with growing alarm. "What? Why?" "We received a complaint," another officer explained, "along with photographic evidence of animal abuse taking place in your basement." The color drained from Jeff's face so quickly it was as if someone had pulled a plug. His mouth opened and closed several times before he found his voice. "What the hell is this?" he growled, trying to summon his usual indignant tone. But there was a tremor in his words that betrayed his panic. Alex watched as Jeff's eyes darted between the officers, searching for an escape route that wasn't there. This time there would be no talking his way out, no slamming the door in their faces, no hiding behind the lack of evidence. "Step aside, sir," the first officer commanded, holding up the warrant. "If you resist, we'll be forced to add obstruction of justice to the charges." Jeff's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his knuckles white with tension. For a moment, it looked like he might try to fight. But then his shoulders slumped, and he stepped back, allowing the officers to enter. Alex held his breath as the authorities pushed inside. Animal control officers followed, carrying carriers and equipment. The morning silence was broken by the sound of boots on hardwood floors and professional voices calling out to each other as they began their search. It didn't take long. Within minutes, someone found the basement door. Alex could hear the heavy footsteps descending the stairs, followed by a moment of complete silence. Then, the reaction he'd been waiting for. "Jesus Christ!" one of the officers swore, his voice carrying up from below. Another voice called out, "We need the carriers down here now!" The professional comm cracked, replaced by urgent activity. More animal control officers rushed inside with equipment. Alex could hear their shocked murmurs, their angry whispers. Finally, the words that made it all real. "We've got them. Get these animals out of here." Jeff, who had been standing in his doorway with forced calm, suddenly exploded. "You can't do this," he shouted, his face contorting with rage. "This is my property. You have no right." He lunged forward as if to stop them, but two officers grabbed his arms. The click of handcuffs was audible in the morning air. "Jeffrey Carter, you're under arrest for animal cruelty," one of the officers began, reciting his rights as Jeff continued to curse and struggle. Mia's grip on Alex's arm tightened. "It's over," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. They watched as animal control officers emerged from the house carrying small carriers. Inside each one, tiny faces peered out, scared, confused, but alive. Alex counted them, 5 kittens in total, plus the one that hadn't made it. His throat tightened as he remembered the still form he'd seen in the basement. Jeff was forced toward one of the police cars, still shouting obscenities. But as they pushed him toward the vehicle, his eyes suddenly locked onto Alex. The rage in his expression transformed into something darker, uglier, a look of pure hatred that carried a silent promise of revenge. But Alex didn't flinch. He met Jeff's gaze steadily, refusing to look away. In that moment, he felt no fear. Jeff had lost. His crimes were exposed. He would face justice for what he'd done to those innocent animals. As the officers pushed Jeff into the back of the police car, Ranger stepped forward. The German shepherd's posture was proud, almost regal, as he watched his nemesis being taken away. Then, as if putting a final punctuation mark on the whole affair, Ranger let out a single, satisfied bark. The sound echoed through the morning air, clear, strong, and triumphant. 2 days after Jeff's arrest, Alex and Mia walked through the doors of the local animal shelter. The familiar smell of cleaning supplies and pet food filled the air, mixed with the sounds of barking dogs and meowing cats. A shelter worker, Sarah, greeted them with a warm smile and led them to the recovery area where the rescued kittens were being kept. "They're doing much better," Sarah explained as she guided them down a quiet hallway. "We've got them on antibiotics and proper nutrition. The change in just 2 days is remarkable." The recovery room was small but clean, with soft lighting and gentle classical music playing from a speaker in the corner. 5 tiny beds were arranged along one wall, each containing a rescued kitten. Some were sleeping, while others watched the visitors with cautious eyes. Alex's chest tightened as he counted them again. 5, not 6. The image of that still form in Jeff's basement flashed through his mind, making his hands clench involuntarily. "Would you like to sit with them?" Sarah asked, gesturing to a comfortable chair near the beds. "They need socialization, and familiar faces can help them learn to trust again." Alex nodded, settling into the chair. Almost immediately, one of the kittens, a tiny orange tabby with white paws, perked up. Her ears twitched forward with interest, and after a moment's hesitation, she wobbled to her feet. Sarah watched with surprise as the kitten made her way toward Alex. "That's remarkable," she said softly. "She hasn't approached anyone yet." The orange tabby reached Alex's feet and looked up at him with big green eyes. Without hesitation, she started climbing up his pant leg, her tiny claws catching in the fabric. Alex carefully helped her up, and she immediately curled into his lap, pressing her face against his stomach. "She likes you?" Sarah said with a smile, watching the interaction with obvious pleasure. Alex chuckled, but the sound caught in his throat. His fingers gently stroked the kitten's head, feeling how thin she still was beneath her fur. These 5 had survived, but his mind kept returning to the one that didn't. The smallest one, the one he'd seen lying motionless in that cold cage. If he'd only gotten there sooner. Mia seemed to sense his thoughts. She placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. "You saved them, Alex," she whispered. "Focus on that." They spent the next hour with the kittens, watching as they slowly became more comfortable with human presence. The orange tabby refused to leave Alex's lap, purring softly whenever he stroked her fur. Later that afternoon, they returned home to find Ranger and Clover exactly where they'd left them, curled up together on their favorite blanket. Clover had made remarkable progress in the past few days. Her wounds were healing nicely, leaving only faint pink lines where the deep gashes had been. Her fur was growing back, soft and clean, covering the places where it had been matted and torn. Mia knelt beside them, gently stroking Clover's head. The tiny kitten immediately started purring, pressing into her touch while simultaneously snuggling closer to Ranger's warm fur. "She wouldn't have made it without him," Mia murmured, watching as Ranger shifted slightly to accommodate Clover's movement. The German shepherd's eyes remained half closed, but his ears twitched at every small sound Clover made. Alex watched the scene with a mixture of pride and amazement. Ranger hadn't just found Clover by accident. He had made a choice, a conscious decision, to protect something small and vulnerable. Even now, weeks after bringing her home, Ranger maintained his vigil. He followed her around the house, waited outside her litter box, made sure she ate her food, and curled around her every time she slept. That evening after dinner, Alex found himself standing at the living room window. The street outside was dark and quiet. Jeff's house stood empty at the end of the road, its windows dark, its yard untended. The police tape had been removed, but the memory of what happened there lingered. Alex took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. It was over. Jeff was gone, facing multiple charges of animal cruelty. The surviving kittens were safe, receiving the care they needed. Even Clover, once so close to death, was thriving. Turning back toward the living room, Alex paused at the sight before him. Ranger lay stretched out on his side, his large frame taking up most of the dog bed. Pressed against his chest, curled into a tiny ball, was Clover. The contrast between them was striking. The powerful German shepherd, capable of such strength, curled protectively around something so small and delicate. Ranger's eyes opened briefly, meeting Alex's gaze. In that moment, Alex felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. Despite everything they'd witnessed, despite the darkness they'd uncovered, there was still so much good in the world. It was there in Ranger's unwavering loyalty, in Clover's resilience, in the simple act of one creature protecting another. For the first time in days, Alex felt the tension in his shoulders release. The weight of what they'd been through, the fear, the anger, the urgency, began to lift. In its place came a quiet certainty that they had done the right thing, and that sometimes that was enough. If you enjoyed the story of Ranger, I handpicked this next story that you will love. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.